The shadows in the room began to shift and twist, responding to the dark power within Ada. She felt as though she were being guided by an unseen force, her movements no longer under her conscious control. Without truly understanding what was happening, Ada found herself picking up Obioma, carrying her to the kitchen, where she had prepared boiling water, throwing Obioma into the large bowl of boiling water. Obioma struggled until she died. Once upon a time, in a busy city in Lagos State, Nigeria, there lived a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Okeke. They were always very busy. Mrs. Okeke owned a big store that sold all kinds of things, from clothes to shoes and toys, while Mr. Okeke is a businessman who is always on a business trip and is hardly seen around the house. Every day, Mrs. Okeke leaves early in the morning and comes back late at night. They worked very hard because they wanted to make sure their family had everything they needed. But there was a problem. Because they were always working, they didn't spend much time with their children. Ekene was 5 years old. She was a happy boy who loved to run around and ask lots of questions. Obioma was only 3. She liked to play with her doll and follow her big brother everywhere. And then there was little Maxwell. He was just a year and still learning to walk. The children missed their parents when they were gone. Sometimes they would ask, "When will daddy and mommy come home?" The nanny would always say, "Soon, don't worry." But soon often felt like forever to them. One day, Mrs. Okeke sat down in the store's office, feeling very tired. She had been thinking a lot about her children. "I hardly spend time with them," she said to herself. "I wish I could do more, but this business keeps me so busy." That evening, after another long day, Mrs. Okeke talked to her husband. "The children need us," she said, "but we can't leave the store. It's too much work for just the 2 of us." Mr. Okeke nodded. "I know, the nanny is always here." Feeling a little disappointed by her husband's response, Mrs. Okeke had an idea. "My sister's daughter Ada. We can bring her in, then she will be staying with us, because I need someone to take care of my children so well." "How old is she?" Mr. Okeke asked. "She's 12 years old, but so mature," Mrs. Okeke answered. Her husband thought about it for a moment. "Ada, a 12-year-old? What about the nanny? What are we going to do about her? We need someone we can trust and rely on, and besides, she has worked with us for a while, so it's time to let her go," Gloria answered. "How are we going to relieve her of her duty when the kids are so close with her?" Mr. Okeke asked. They are still kids and barely know a thing. They won't even notice her gone. And even if they do, we'll just come up with something or an excuse maybe," answered Gloria, which is Mrs. Okeke. Feeling reluctant. "If that's what you want," the husband answered. The next day, Mrs. Okeke called her sister. "Sister, I was thinking, could Ada come stay with us for a while? We could really use some help at home." Her sister was happy to hear the idea. "Of course, Ada would love to stay with you. She's always asking about her cousins." So it was settled. Ada would come to live with the Okeke's family. She would help take care of her younger cousins and make sure they were not alone when their parents were at work. When Ada arrived, the children were very excited to see her. Ekene ran to her and gave her a big hug. Obioma smiled shyly and little Maxwell waved his tiny hands. Ada smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm here now. We are going to have lots of fun together." With Ada around, things started to get better. She played with Tekene and Obioma and even helped Maxwell learn to walk. The house was still quiet during the day, but now it was filled with the sound of laughter when the children were with their cousin. Even though Mr. and Mrs. Okeke were still busy with their work, they felt happier. They knew their children were in good hands, and that made all the difference. At first, Ada was happy to be with her aunt and uncle. She loved spending time with her little cousins, and they loved her too. She would play with Tekene, help Obioma dress her dolls, and carry little Maxwell when he cried. In the mornings, Ada helped feed them breakfast and made sure they were clean before the nanny arrived. It felt good to be useful, and Ada was happy to be part of the family. But after a while, things started to change, especially with her auntie. At first, Auntie Gloria was kind and always said, "Thank you," when Ada helped out. She would smile and say, "You are such a big help, Ada. I'm so glad you are here." A day never goes by without appreciating Ada's effort. But as the days went by, Auntie Gloria became busier and more stressed. She started coming home in a bad mood, her face looking tired and upset. And with that, she always tries to pass on the aggression to Ada. Ada started noticing her aunt's behavior, but she couldn't figure out why. So, she decided to focus on what she was there to do as her aunt's smile became rare and there was always a frown. One evening, after a long day at work, Aunt Gloria came home and looked around the house with angry eyes. "Ada, why is the living room still messy?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ada looked at the toys on the floor. Ekene and Obioma had been playing earlier, but she hadn't had a chance to clean up yet because Maxwell needed her attention. "I'm so sorry, Auntie," Ada said, quickly bending down to pick up the toys. "I will clean it right away." But Auntie Gloria wasn't satisfied. She crossed her arms and glared at Ada. "I don't know what you are doing all day, Ada. I asked you to help, but it seems like you are not doing anything." Ada felt a lump in her throat. She was trying her best, but Auntie Gloria didn't seem to see it. "I was taking care of Maxwell," she explained quietly. "That's not an excuse." Auntie Gloria snapped. "You are 12 years old, Ada. You should be able to handle more than this. I expect better from you." Ada blinked back her tears and hurried to finish cleaning. She didn't want to upset Auntie Gloria anymore, but inside she felt hurt. She missed her own mother and wondered why Auntie Gloria was being so harsh. As the days went by, things only got worse. Auntie Gloria would leave Ada with a long list of chores to do every day. "Make sure the house is clean before I get back," she would say. "Wash the clothes, sweep the floors, and don't forget to cook dinner." Ada worked hard to finish everything, but there was always so much to do. She had to take care of her cousins, clean the house, and still find time to cook. Ada wished there was at least someone else other than her doing the work, as the work was so much and she couldn't bear it. One afternoon, Ada was washing dishes in the kitchen when Auntie Gloria came home from the store. She walked into the kitchen with a deep frown on her face. "Ada, why is the kitchen still dirty?" she asked angrily. Ada looked up from the sink, her hands still wet. "I'm almost done, Auntie," she said softly. "Almost isn't good enough," Auntie Gloria snapped. "You have been here for weeks and the house is still a mess. You are old enough to do better." Ada's heart sank. She was trying her best, but no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough for Auntie Gloria. "I'm so sorry, Auntie," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Gloria didn't even look at her as she walked away, shaking her head. "Sorry won't clean this house," she muttered under her breath. Ada stood there, her eyes stinging with hushed tears. She didn't understand why her aunt was so upset with her all the time. She missed her home, her mother, and the days when she didn't have to do so many chores. As time went on, Aunt Gloria began giving Ada more work to do. Every day there was a new task. Ada, wash the clothes. Ada, clean the bathrooms. Ada, cook dinner. No matter how much Ada did, Aunt Gloria always found something wrong. She would scold Ada for not doing things fast enough or for not doing them perfectly. Uncle Okeke didn't say much. He was busy with work too, and when he came home, he usually went straight to his room to rest. Sometimes he would smile at Ada and ask how she was doing, but he didn't seem to notice how hard things were for her. Ada was beginning to feel very lonely. She had thought coming to live with her aunt and uncle would be fun, but now it didn't feel that way at all. She missed her mother's kind words and gentle touch. Every day, Ada hoped things would get better, but instead, they seemed to get worse. Even though Aunt Gloria was always angry with her, Ada tried her best to stay cheerful for her cousins. They were the only ones who made her smile. Ekene would always run to her after school shouting, "Ada, let's play." Obioma would show her the dolls she had dressed up, and little Maxwell would toddle over to her with his arms open wide, wanting to be picked up. With her cousins, Ada felt a little bit of joy, but deep inside, the hurt from Auntie Gloria's harsh words stayed with her, as she was still confused why her aunt changed so badly towards her. The worst part of it was that Auntie Gloria didn't bother enrolling Ada in any school. Even when the husband wanted to, she refused. Ada's life in her aunt and uncle's house became more difficult with each passing day. Auntie Gloria's harsh words turned into constant scolding, and Ada felt like she would never do anything right. No matter how hard she worked, her aunt always found something to complain about. One Saturday morning, the house was quiet. Aunt Gloria had left early to run errands, leaving Ada with her usual list of chores. The list was long. She had to clean the house, wash the clothes, sweep the yard, and prepare lunch before Aunt Gloria returned. Ada looked at the list and sighed. She knew she had to work quickly, or Auntie Gloria would come back and be angry. She started with the laundry, scrubbing the clothes with all her strength. The soap stung her hands, but she kept doing it, knowing she had to finish before the afternoon. As she hung the clothes outside to dry, the sun beat down on her, making her sweat drip down her face. But she couldn't stop. There was still so much to do. After finishing the laundry, she rushed inside to clean the house. She swept the floors, wiped the windows, and dusted the furniture. By the time she was done, her arms ached from all the work, but there was no time to rest. She still had to cook lunch. As she stirred the pot of soup on the stove, Auntie Gloria suddenly burst through the door. Ada's heart raced, hoping her aunt wouldn't find anything wrong. But as usual, Aunt Gloria's eyes scanned the room, searching for something to criticize. "Ada, what have you been doing all day?" Aunt Gloria's voice was sharp. "Look at the dust on that shelf. You can't even clean properly." Ada felt her stomach twist. She had wiped the shelf, but maybe she had missed a spot. "I'm sorry, Auntie. I will clean it again," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sorry isn't good enough, Ada," Auntie Gloria snapped. "I'm tired of your laziness. You have been here long enough to know how to keep this house in order." Ada lowered her head and nodded. Even though tears were threatening to fall, no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Aunt Gloria always seemed to find a reason to yell at her. A few days later, things got even worse. Aunt Gloria left for work in the morning, but before leaving, she gave Ada another long list of tasks. This time she warned her, "If I come back and this house isn't spotless, you will regret it." Ada worked as fast as she could, moving from one chore to the other. She scrubbed the floors until her knees hurt, cleaned the bathrooms until they sparkled, and washed the dishes until her hands were red and sore. But with three small children running around, it was impossible to keep everything perfect. Every time she finished cleaning one room, Ekene or Obioma would come in and make a mess. When Aunt Gloria returned, her face was tight with anger. She stormed into the house, looking around like she was searching for something to be mad about. "Ada!" she shouted. "Did you even do anything today?" Ada felt her heart drop. She had worked so hard, but it was clear that Auntie Gloria wasn't happy. I did, Auntie. I cleaned the floors, washed the clothes, and enough with your excuses." Auntie Gloria cut her off. She pointed to a small toy on the floor left behind by Obioma. "Look at this. You can't even keep the house clean for one day. What kind of girl are you?" Before Ada could respond, Aunt Gloria grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly towards the living room. "You think you can just sit around and do nothing? Well, I'll show you what happens when you are lazy." Aunt Gloria's grip was tight and Ada winced in pain as she was dragged across the room. Aunt Gloria forced her to kneel and scrub the floor again, even though it was already clean. "Don't get up until this floor shines," she ordered. Ada's hands shook as she scrubbed the floor, tears silently falling down her cheeks. Her knees hurt, her back ached, and her heart felt heavy. She didn't understand why Aunt Gloria was so cruel to her. What had she done to deserve this? Later that evening, after Aunt Gloria had gone to bed, Ada quietly crept to her room. She lay down on her small mat, staring at the ceiling, her body exhausted from the day's work. She missed her mother terribly and wished she could go home, but she knew she couldn't. Aunt Gloria and Uncle Keke needed her to take care of the house and the children, and she had nowhere else to go. Her nights were her only moment of peace, but even then, she was never truly alone. Lately, Mr. Keke has been returning from work often. He's not always seen around as usual because he's either in his room or his study room. But recently, he would always spy on Ada whenever she's working, and that frightened Ada even more. Her auntie has been making her life miserable for a while, so she couldn't deal with her uncle. So she thought. But he always seemed to be around when she was cleaning or working in the house. At first, she didn't think much of it. He was her uncle after all. But slowly, Ada began to feel uneasy. Sometimes, when she was sweeping the floor, she would look up and find him standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her. Other times, he would walk into the kitchen and stand too close, watching her as she worked. "How is my hard-working girl?" Uncle Keke would ask with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Uncle," Ada would reply, trying to keep her distance. But no matter how hard she tried to avoid him, Uncle Keke always seemed to be nearby. He would pat her shoulder or brush his hand against hers when he passed by, making Ada feel uncomfortable. She didn't understand why, but something about his touch didn't feel right. As the days went by, Ada's unease grew. She didn't know who to talk to. Auntie Gloria was already so angry with her all the time, and Uncle Okeke seemed to be everywhere. The house that had once felt like a safe place now felt like a prison, and Ada didn't know how much more she could take. The house was very quiet one evening, with only the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath Ada's feet. Aunt Gloria had taken the children to visit a neighbor, leaving Ada and Uncle Keke alone once again. The oppressive silence made Ada's anxiety worse. She tried to focus on her chores, but her mind was constantly alert, her eyes darting towards every corner of the house. As she cleaned the kitchen, Her heart skipped a beat when she heard footsteps approaching. It wasn't the hurried, uneven steps of Aunt Gloria or the clumsy scurrying of the children. It was the slow, deliberate tread of Uncle Okeke. She felt a shiver run her spine. "Good evening, Ada," Uncle Okeke said, his voice smooth and calm. Ada turned to see him standing in the doorway, his eyes locked onto her. She forced a weak smile and tried to focus on her work, hoping he would just pass by and leave her in peace. "You are working so hard," he continued, stepping closer. "You should take a break." Ada's heart pounded in her chest. "I'm fine, uncle," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to finish these dishes." Uncle Keke didn't move away. Instead, he leaned in, his presence looming over her. She could feel his breath against her neck, and her skin crawled. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and Ada flinched. Ada tried to pull away, but his hand tightened on her shoulder. Panic surged through her, making her hands shake. She wanted to scream, to run, but fear held her in place. His touch was too close, too intimate. I need to finish," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Please let me go." But Uncle Okeke didn't listen. He stepped closer, his hand sliding down her arm while Ada was resisting. Mr. Okeke saw that she wouldn't give in, so he made her unconscious. Take her to the room and forcefully went into her, leaving her to bleed. After a while, her auntie returned, and her shout brought Ada back. As Ada lifted her body from the bed, she noticed the blood on her body and how sore she was. Then she started wailing. She cried till she couldn't feel herself anymore. That same night, the memory continued to play in her head, making her question her existence. She felt dirty, deep, sharp pain that she wasn't sure if she was going to be alright. Ada needed someone to confide in, but unfortunately there is no one. She just started crying all over again, unsure of what to do next. The next morning, Ada dragged herself to the kitchen to do the dishes, then proceeded to do other things. After she was done with everything her aunt told her to do, she retired to her room, but this time around, she locked the door, climbed the bed, and all memories flooded her head. Her uncle's touch, his words, everything felt like a betrayal of the trust she had once had. She felt trapped, her body and mind overwhelmed by the fear of what might come next. The days that followed were a blur of dread and discomfort. Uncle Keke continued to make excuses to be near Ada, his presence a constant reminder of the nightmare she was living. She tried to avoid him, staying busy with chores or hiding in her small room whenever possible. But no matter where she went, the fear followed her. Auntie Gloria remained oblivious to the growing tension in the house. She continued her harsh treatment of Ada, adding to the girl's sense of hopelessness. Ada felt like a prisoner, her world shrinking to the confines of the house and the dark, oppressive presence of her uncle. She lived in a constant state of anxiety, her spirit wearing thin under the weight of her suffering. She had once hoped that things would get better, that someone would notice her plight and offer help. But as the days turned into weeks, she felt more isolated and helpless than ever before. Ada's life had become a twisted maze of fear, pain, and confusion. Auntie Gloria's daily verbal lashings and endless chores had already broken her spirit, but it was her uncle Okeke's unsettling presence that filled her with a deeper dread. The way he continued lingering around her when they were alone made her heart race. He wasn't even sorry for what he did. Ada totally ignored her uncle and continued doing what she was doing. After she was through with what she was doing, she went outside to fetch water. While she was busy, an old woman, Iya Bashira, who was sitting not too close to her, was busy observing her. She was known in the neighborhood for her strange ways. She rarely spoke to anyone, just keeping to herself and watching everything from her veranda. Iya Bashira, who had been watching Ada for a while spiritually, now wanted to take her chance. She neither interested in offering any useful help to Ada nor pity her. She saw a vulnerable and broken child who could be molded into a different being. As Ada continued fetching water, Iya Bashira took the opportunity to walk up to her in pretense to help. "You look pale and sick, and despite that you are still working hard, child," Iya Bashira said. She offered Ada a seat, to sit and rest for a while before she resumed fetching water. Ada was hesitant at first because she doesn't want her auntie to meet the bucket in the house empty. "Everything will be okay," said Iya Bashira, assuring Ada. Ada finally gave in, then she sat. Iya Bashira entered inside to get Ada something to eat. Unknown to Ada, something was in that food. After she was done eating, she hurriedly went to take her bucket and continue what she was doing. With a grateful heart, she thanked the old woman and left. When she got home, she went to her room, waiting for her auntie to return from her marketplace. Shortly after, her auntie returned with her usual attitude towards her. That night, as everyone was sleeping including Ada, she saw herself in an abandoned hut with strange objects around, the air thick with smell of burning herbs and smoke. Ada's stomach twisted with fear as she couldn't understand how she got there. Before she knew what was happening, she saw someone approaching her direction who looked old and wretched. Ada, not knowing what to do, started taking some steps backward. As the person drew nearer, she was surprised at who it was. Ada couldn't move because she was so overwhelmed with what is happening. She started crying, pleading to Iya Bashira to let her go, which fell on deaf ears. Iya Bashira said some stops. Then, both she and Ada appeared in front of a large boiling pot of something that smelled so bad, making Ada uncomfortable. While they were standing, Iya Bashira walked to the other side of the pot, taking a calabash and putting the mixture inside, offering Ada to drink. Ada was so scared, bluntly refused. Then, Iya Bashira walked towards her, reminding her of all the things she was passing through in the hands of her uncle and aunt. With that, she took the portion with hatred and drank it. "Now, no one will hurt you or cause you pain again, and if they do, you have all the things you need to stop them," whispered Iya Bashira. As soon as she was done, the voice of her aunt brought her back. When she woke up, she couldn't understand why Iya Bashira was there. Different questions, but there is no one she could share with it. All Ada knew was that the moment she opened her eyes, she felt different. It was as if her spirit left her body, leaving her empty. She had always sought a way out of her suffering, but she unknowingly stepped into something more dangerous. The evening was still. The usual hum of household activities was replaced by an eerie silence. Ada, only 12 years old, felt an unfamiliar heaviness in her chest as she wandered through the house. That evening, after she was done with everything her aunt asked her to do, Ada went to Obioma's room. She felt a strange pull. She had been feeling disconnected lately. Her emotions, a storm she couldn't understand. The soft glow of the night light cast gentle shadows on the walls, creating a comforting ambience in the otherwise darkened room. Obioma was asleep, her small form nestled under a blanket. Unaware of the storm brewing around her, Ada stood over her cousin, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and something else she couldn't quite place. Her hands felt unnaturally cold, and the room seemed to grow colder with each passing second. The shadows in the room began to shift and twist, responding to the dark power within Ada. She felt as though she were being guided by an unseen force, her movement no longer under her conscious control. Without truly understanding what was happening, Ada found herself picking up Obioma, carrying her to the kitchen, where she had prepared boiling water, throwing Obioma into the large bowl of boiling water. Obioma struggled until she died. The few seconds that followed were a blur. Ada's body moved with a force beyond her understanding. The sudden shock of the impact seemed to wake Ada from her stupor. She looked down at Obioma, her breath catching in her throat. The room was silent, save for the rapid, panicking beating of Ada's heart. Obioma lay still, her eyes closed as if in peaceful slumber. But the stillness was all wrong. Ada's hands shook uncontrollably, and tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the terrifying truth. She hadn't just harmed Obioma, she had ended her young life. The weight of what she had done hit Ada like a ton of bricks. Her body felt numb and her mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. Her breath came in short, rage burst as she stumbled backward. The room spinning around her, the darkness that had controlled her seemed to lift, leaving her with a profound sense of dread and regret. Ada backed out of the room, her legs barely able to support her. She ran down the hallway, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had never felt so alone and lost. The enormity of her actions crashing over her like a relentless tide. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but her voice was caught in her throat. She found herself in a corner of the house, crouched down, trying to catch her breath. The stillness of the night was now oppressive. The once comforting silence now a haunting reminder of what she had done. Her tears fell freely, mixing with the cold sweat on her face. Ada was trapped between the power she didn't fully understand and the overwhelming guilt that threatened to consume her. The weight of the night's event felt unbearable. Ada knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She had lost control in the worst way possible, and now, as the minutes ticked by, she was left with the crushing reality of her actions. The darkness inside her claimed not just a part of her soul, but the life of someone she had once loved. In the quiet aftermath, the house remained eerily silent, the darkness outside now echoing the turmoil within Ada. She could only hope that somehow, some way, she could find a way to make things right, though she knew deep down that this was a pain that might never fully heal. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow in the room. Aunt Gloria stretched, yawning as she woke up, ready to begin her usual busy day. She noticed the quietness of the house and thought nothing of it at first, assuming the children were still asleep. But when she entered Obioma's room, her heart skipped a beat. Obioma wasn't there. Panic started to creep into her chest as she called out for her husband, Uncle Okeke. "Where is Obioma?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. Together they searched the house, calling out Obioma's name. They looked in every room, under beds, in closets, but she was nowhere to be found. Then they noticed something strange. Ada was also missing. Frantic, they rushed down the stairs, calling for both girls. Just as they were about to head outside, Auntie Gloria entered the kitchen. That was when she saw it, a large bowl, sitting in the middle of the floor. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. The sight before her made her stomach drop. Inside the big bowl, covered by the faint traces of water, was Obioma. Her small body lay lifeless, a stark contrast to the vibrant girl who had been running around the house just a day before. Auntie Gloria screamed, her voice filled with terror, and she rushed to pull her daughter out. "Obioma! Obioma!" she cried, her hands trembling as she cradled her daughter's cold body. Uncle Kiki rushed in behind her, his face pale as he took in the scene. Without a second thought, they wrapped Obioma in a cloth and sped to the hospital, hearts pounding in their chest. The doctors tried their best, But it was too late. Obioma was gone. Auntie Gloria's world came crashing down. The unbearable grief washed over her, leaving her numb. Uncle Keke held her as they sobbed together in the hospital waiting room, unable to comprehend how this nightmare had happened. When they finally returned home, the house felt different, heavier, darker. Auntie Gloria's eyes were filled with tears as she found Ada, now sitting in a corner, quiet and still. Her mind raced with questions. What happened, Ada? Why was Obioma in the kitchen? What did you do? Auntie Gloria asked, her voice trembling with fear and confusion. But as Ada lifted her head, her once innocent eyes were now filled with something far more sinister. Her lips curled into a chilling smile as she whispered, "You don't understand. I will kill all of you, just like I did to her." The words sent shivers down Aunt Gloria's spine. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Uncle Keke stood frozen in shock, staring at Ada as if seeing her for the first time. That was the moment they realized that this wasn't Ada. There was something evil inside her, something far beyond their understanding. The strange behavior, the terrifying threat, the unexplained death of Obioma. This wasn't ordinary. Ada started laughing, pointing at Uncle Keke. "You evil man, you took away my innocence, and your daughter Obioma have to pay the price. And you, Auntie Gloria, you turned me to your slave, and for that reason, I will make you both pay with your blood." Fear gripped them. They called Pastor Ken immediately, begging him to come and help. Within an hour, Pastor Ken arrived, his face serious as he prepared to confront whatever had taken hold of Ada. As soon as he entered the house, he could feel the heavy presence of darkness lingering in the air. They gathered in the living room as Pastor Ken began to pray over Ada, calling out for the evil spirit to leave her body. It was a battle between light and darkness. Suddenly, Iya Bashira, who had been the one that initiated Ada into the dark forces, clutched her chest. A sharp pain radiated through her body, and she fell to the ground, her eyes wide with fear. The spirit that had once controlled Ada was now turning against her. With a final, strangled breath, Iya Bashira collapsed and died. The darkness that had connected her to Ada finally severed. Back at the house, Pastor Ken continued to pray, his voice strong and unwavering. After what seemed like hours, Ada collapsed to the ground, the evil spirit finally leaving her body. The room fell silent and Ada lay still, exhausted and shaking, but finally free. Auntie Gloria and Uncle Keke stared in disbelief, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. As the realization sunk in, they knew their lives would never be the same again. The atmosphere in the Okeke household was heavy with sorrow, even after the deliverance. Ada sat quietly, her eyes hollow, as the weight of everything that had happened sank in. Pastor Ken's prayers had freed her from the dark force that had taken control of her, but the memories of what she had done, of Obioma's death, still lingered in her heart. Auntie Gloria and Uncle Keke, shaken by the event, realized the gravity of their mistakes. They had neglected Ada, treated her poorly, and allowed her to suffer without knowing the full extent of her pain. But the moment of reckoning had come. One evening, as they gathered around the table, Uncle Keke broke the silence. His voice was low and filled with regret. "I have something to confess," he began, his hands trembling. Auntie Gloria and Ada listened in stunned silence as he revealed the truth about his unsettling behavior, admitting to the uncomfortable advances he had made towards Ada and how his actions had added to the darkness that had consumed their home. The shame was evident in his voice, and for the first time, he truly acknowledged the pain he had caused. Tears
filled Auntie Gloria's eyes. She had been blinded by her anger and frustration, failing to see what was happening right under her nose. She had taken out her stress on Ada, leaving her niece vulnerable and alone. The guilt was overwhelming, and in that moment, she knew there was no easy way to make up for what had happened. "We are so sorry, Ada," Auntie Gloria whispered, her voice cracking. "We failed you. We should have protected you and loved you. We can never bring Obioma back, but we want to make things right with you." Ada, still shaken by the horrors of the past few days, nodded quietly. She understood their remorse, but the memories of her cousin's lifeless body haunted her. No matter how much they apologized or how hard they tried to make it up to her, the house itself was a constant reminder of the tragedy. "I can't stay here," Ada finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everywhere I look, I remember what happened. I remember Obioma." Auntie Gloria and Uncle Keke exchanged glances, their hearts heavy with understanding. They knew Ada needed to heal, and staying in the house where such a terrible thing had occurred would only prolong her pain. After a long discussion, they made the difficult decision to take Ada back to her mother. The following day, Auntie Gloria and Uncle Keke prepared to return Ada to her family. It wasn't an easy goodbye. Auntie Gloria hugged her tightly, whispering words of comfort. "You are always welcome here, Ada. We'll never stop loving you," she said, though they both knew it would be a long time before Ada would ever feel comfortable coming back. When they arrived at Ada's mother's house, her mom welcomed her with open arms. She had always supported Auntie Gloria, but had never imagined that things would turn out like this. Ada's mother promised to take care of her, to help her heal from the pain she had endured, and to make sure she never felt alone again. As Auntie Gloria and Uncle Keke drove away, leaving Ada in the care of her mother, they knew their lives would never be the same. Their home had been shattered by loss, guilt and secret, and they couldn't stay there any longer. The weight of Obioma's death, Ada's suffering, and Uncle Keke's confession hung over them like a dark cloud. So, they packed up their belongings, sold the house, and moved to a new city with their remaining two children. It was a fresh start, an attempt to rebuild their lives after the tragedy that had torn them apart. But no matter how far they moved, the memory of what had happened would always stay with them. For Ada, returning to her mother's house was the first step towards healing. Surrounded by love and care, she slowly began to recover from the trauma she had endured. But the memory of Obioma, the cousin she had lost in the most tragic way, would forever remain in her heart. The pain may never fully go away, but she had been freed from the darkness, and now she had the chance to find peace. This story teaches us the importance of kindness and standing up for others. Ada was treated badly by her aunt and uncle, which made her very sad and hurt. When people are treated unfairly, it can cause them to do things they might regret later. Like the popular saying, "What goes around comes around." Nothing is hidden under the sun. One day, it will come to light and the consequences will be severe. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Ada on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.